In the heart of West Virginia, where the mountains cradled secrets in their shadows, lay the abandoned town of Eldridge Hollow. Once a thriving community, it had been abandoned after a mining disaster claimed the lives of dozens of men, leaving only whispers of their stories behind. The locals said the spirits of the miners lingered, wandering the ruins, searching for something they'd never find. One overcast autumn afternoon, a group of urban explorers, Sarah, Jake, and Emily, decided to venture into the remnants of Eldridge Hollow, drawn by tales of its ghostly inhabitants. The trio parked their van on the edge of the town and began their trek through the underbrush, their breaths visible in the chilly air. The sound of crunching leaves was the only noise as they approached the skeletal remains of the old mining town. The first building they entered was the general store. Its shelves lay empty, but the scent of decay hung heavily, mingling with something else, something metallic. As Sarah moved deeper into the store, she noticed an old photograph pinned to the wall. It was faded but depicted a group of miners, smiles wide, standing proudly in front of the mine entrance. A single name was scrawled beneath, Eli Thompson. "Look at this," she called, holding up the photo. The others crowded around, squinting at the dim light. "Who's Eli?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think he was one of the miners. The one who—" Sarah began, but she was interrupted by a sudden crash from the back of the store. They froze, eyes wide, hearts pounding. "Just the wind," Emily muttered, though her voice trembled. As they continued their exploration, they stumbled upon the mine entrance, a dark maw that seemed to exhale cold air. The metal door hung askew, and a warning sign, long faded, swayed slightly in the breeze. Despite their instincts telling them to turn back, the thrill of discovery pulled them in. With flashlights in hand, they descended into the depths of the mine. The air grew heavy, damp, and the echoes of their footsteps bounced ominously off the walls. Shadows danced as they moved deeper, and soon, they reached a cavern illuminated by the flickering beams of their lights. In the center stood an old wooden cart, rusted and half-buried in dirt. Surrounding it were piles of bones, a grim testament to the miners' fate. Panic gripped them as they realized they had disturbed something ancient. "Let's get out of here," Jake urged. But as they turned, the temperature plummeted. A deep rumble echoed through the mine, and a distant wail broke the suffocating silence. It was a sound of mourning, of lost souls. As they raced back towards the entrance, the air thickened, and shadows shifted menacingly. Emily stumbled, and as she fell, her flashlight illuminated a figure. An apparition of a miner, face gaunt and hollow, his eyes dark voids of despair. He raised a hand, as if reaching out, his lips moving in silent desperation. "Run!" Sarah screamed, yanking Emily to her feet. They bolted, hearts racing, the wailing growing louder, more frantic. The walls seemed to close in, the darkness pressing against them, threatening to swallow them whole. They burst into the open air, gasping for breath, but the moment they stepped outside, the wailing ceased. The silence felt heavy, unnatural. Behind them, the mine loomed ominously, as if it were a living entity. What was that?" Jake stammered, his face pale. "I don't know," Sarah whispered, shaking. "But we have to leave. Now." As they made their way back to their van, the shadows of Eldridge Hollow seemed to follow them, flickering at the edge of their vision. When they reached the van, they piled inside, breathless and shaken. But as Jake turned the key in the ignition, a chilling realization hit them. Emily was staring out the back window, transfixed. Come on," Sarah urged, but Emily didn't respond. Instead, her eyes widened, and she pointed. In the distance, a procession of spectral miners emerged from the shadows of the ruins, their faces twisted in sorrow, their forms flickering like candle flames. They walked slowly, as if bound by an unseen force, heading towards the mine once more. Among them, Eli Thompson stood out, his gaze locked onto Emily. "I think they want me," she murmured, tears glistening in her eyes. "No, they can't." Jake tried to protest, but the van's engine sputtered. Panic set in as they realized they were stranded. With a final desperate surge of adrenaline, Jake slammed his foot on the gas, and the van lurched forward, tearing down the road. But as they sped away, a chilling laugh echoed through the air, mingling with the wind. For days afterward, Emily was haunted by dreams of Eldridge Hollow, the miners' faces etched into her mind. She could hear their whispers, their pleas, and the name Eli resonated with her, echoing like a heartbeat. Unable to shake the feeling that they had left something behind, the trio returned a week later, the fear palpable. This time, armed with determination, they scoured the town for any clue that might explain the strange connection Emily felt. Finally, in the remnants of a small chapel, they uncovered an old journal belonging to Eli. It spoke of the tragedy of the mining disaster and his efforts to rescue his fellow miners. As the last entry faded into a heartbreaking confession of guilt, the journal suddenly grew cold in Emily's hands, and she heard his voice clearly in her mind. Asterisk, help us find peace. As they pieced together the tragedy, Emily felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. They organized a small memorial for the miners, returning to Eldridge Hollow one last time. Standing at the mine's entrance, they lit candles and offered prayers. As dusk fell, a warm breeze rustled through the trees, and for the first time, the air felt lighter. The miners' whispers had faded, and a sense of calm settled over the hollow. But as they prepared to leave, Emily turned back one last time. In the twilight, she could see the figures of the miners standing at the edge of the woods, watching, no longer bound by sorrow, but now in peaceful repose. Eldridge Hollow would always hold its secrets, but for Emily and her friends, they had become part of the story, a connection to the forgotten ones who once toiled in the dark, seeking the light of redemption. And as they drove away, the wind carried the soft, grateful whispers of the miners behind them, fading into the night. As Emily and her friends drove away from Eldridge Hollow, a strange mix of relief and unease filled the air. The candles flickered behind them, casting long shadows on the walls of the mine, but the weight of the miners' presence lingered. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that their connection to the spirits was far from over. That night, Emily lay awake, the whispers echoing in her mind. She could still see Eli's face, haunted yet hopeful, imploring her to help. Sleep eluded her, and just before dawn, she made a decision. She had to learn more about the town, the miners, and what had truly happened in that dark place. The next morning, she called Sarah and Jake, her voice urgent. I think there's more to discover. We need to go back. I can't explain it, but it feels like we've only scratched the surface. After some convincing, they agreed. The three of them returned to the library in the nearby town, poring over old newspaper clippings and town records. As they sifted through faded pages, they discovered that the mining disaster had been covered up. There were discrepancies in the reports, missing names, and unmarked graves. One article caught Emily's eye, a photograph of a memorial service held in honor of the miners, attended by their families, except for one name, Eli Thompson. The article hinted at a dispute over his fate. Some claimed he had survived but disappeared soon after, while others said he had been blamed for the disaster. That's why he's still there, Emily murmured, tracing her fingers over the image of the memorial. He feels guilty, trapped by the town's shame. They dug deeper, uncovering testimonies from surviving family members. A woman named Margaret Thompson, Eli's sister, had been one of the last to speak with him before the disaster. She described how Eli had been acting strangely, haunted by dreams of the mine and the men who died in it. We need to find Margaret, Jake suggested, excitement lacing his voice. She might know what really happened. After some digging, they tracked her down to a small cottage on the outskirts of the town, surrounded by overgrown gardens and an air of nostalgia. When they knocked on the door, a frail woman with silver hair and deep-set eyes greeted them. Come in, she said, her voice trembling but warm. I've been expecting you. Inside, the walls were adorned with photographs of miners and family gatherings. The air was thick with memories, and as they settled around her small kitchen table, Emily felt an overwhelming sense of belonging. Margaret listened intently as they recounted their experience in Eldridge Hollow, her expression shifting from disbelief to a poignant sadness. "Eli," she whispered, eyes glistening. "He never found peace. I've carried his memory with me all these years, hoping he'd come home." Emily leaned in. "What really happened that day? Why didn't he attend the memorial?" Margaret took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "He went into the mine that morning, determined to finish his shift, but there was a cave-in. I was told he didn't make it out, but I always felt he was alive. I had a dream the night of the disaster. I saw him, standing at the entrance, calling to me. I woke up knowing he was still out there, lost in the darkness." Tears filled her eyes, and Emily's heart ached for the woman who had lost her brother to a town that had turned its back on him. "We saw him, Margaret. He's still in the mine, trapped by guilt and anger." Margaret's breath hitched. "You saw Eli? What does he want?" "We think he wants closure," Sarah interjected. "He needs to be remembered, to tell his story." The old woman nodded, wiping her tears. "Then we must honor him properly. He deserves to be remembered." With renewed purpose, the three friends and Margaret began planning a memorial service that would not only honor Eli but all the miners who had perished. They gathered stories from surviving family members, seeking out anyone who could share their memories. As word spread, the small community began to rally around the cause, and the town's forgotten history slowly resurfaced. On the day of the memorial, the sun shone bright over Eldridge Hollow. A makeshift altar was built outside the mine, adorned with flowers, candles, and photographs of the miners. As they gathered, the air buzzed with emotion. Families shared stories of their loved ones, laughter mixed with tears, and for the first time, the miners felt acknowledged. As the ceremony progressed, Emily felt a shift in the atmosphere. The shadows of the past seemed to pull closer, wrapping around the gathering like a protective embrace. As dusk approached, Emily stood before the crowd, heart pounding. "Today, we honor not just the miners who lost their lives, but those who have been lost to memory. Eli Thompson deserves to be remembered, not as a ghost, but as a brother, a friend, and a hero." As she spoke, the wind picked up, swirling leaves around them, and for a moment, a soft glow emanated from the mine's entrance. The crowd fell silent, their eyes drawn to the darkness. Then, as if summoned by Emily's words, the figure of Eli appeared at the mine's mouth, bathed in ethereal light. The townsfolk gasped, eyes wide in disbelief, but Emily felt a sense of calm wash over her. Eli's ghostly form stepped forward, and the crowd instinctively parted, allowing him to approach. He looked at Margaret, his expression a mix of longing and regret. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice echoing like a distant memory. "I tried to save them. I couldn't let go." Margaret wept silently, but the tears held a sense of release. "You were never to blame, Eli. We've missed you all these years." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the air grew still. Eli looked around, taking in the faces of his friends and family, the love radiating from the gathered crowd. "I'm ready to go," he said, voice stronger now. "Thank you for remembering." In that moment, the winds howled, and a bright light enveloped Eli. The townsfolk shielded their eyes, but Emily couldn't look away. She felt an overwhelming surge of warmth and gratitude as Eli's spirit began to dissolve into the air, merging with the evening sky. With his departure, a sense of peace settled over Eldridge Hollow. The tension that had lingered for decades evaporated, replaced by the joyous memories being shared among the townsfolk. They began to see Eldridge not just as a ghost town but as a place of community and remembrance. But as the night wore on, Emily couldn't shake a lingering feeling. While they had freed Eli, the other miners' spirits still felt present, shadows flitting at the corners of her vision. She realized the work wasn't finished. Eldridge Hollow still held many stories waiting to be told. As the last candle flickered out, Emily turned to her friends. "I think we need to stay a little longer. There are still shadows to confront, and those forgotten souls deserve their chance to be remembered too." The journey to uncover the full truth of Eldridge Hollow was just beginning, and as they stood together in the quiet night, the promise of more revelations echoed in the darkness, a reminder that some stories refuse to remain buried. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. With renewed determination, Emily, Sarah, and Jake decided to delve deeper into Eldridge Hollow's past. They felt an undeniable pull, as if the lingering spirits were guiding them, urging them to bring closure to all who had suffered in silence. The next morning, they set out to explore the remaining buildings in the town, focusing on the structures they hadn't yet investigated. They first headed to the old chapel, its steeple crumbling but still standing defiantly against time. Inside, the air felt thick with unspoken prayers, and they moved cautiously among the pews. As they sifted through the debris, Sarah discovered a hidden compartment beneath the pulpit. Inside was an old ledger, its pages yellowed and brittle. The entries detailed the lives of the miners, their families, and their fates on the day of the disaster. Each name was a testament to a life cut short, but one entry caught Emily's eye: Thomas Reed, last seen in the lower shaft. Who was he? Emily wondered aloud, her fingers tracing the name. Jake looked over her shoulder. He must have been part of Eli's crew. If he didn't make it out, maybe his family is still looking for answers. As they read through the ledger, they learned more about the miners, stories of friendship, love, and dreams. The names became faces in Emily's mind, and she felt a deep connection to each one. They were not just shadows. They were people, and their stories deserved to be shared. After a day of research, they decided to visit the families of the remaining miners. Emily took it upon herself to contact each one, explaining what they had found. The response was overwhelmingly supportive. Families were eager to gather and remember their loved ones. The next weekend, they organized another gathering at the chapel, inviting everyone connected to the miners. As the families arrived, the atmosphere shifted from somber to celebratory, a mix of laughter and tears as they shared memories. The chapel filled with stories, their voices intertwining, each tale bringing a sense of healing. As night fell, Emily stood before the crowd once more, the flickering candles illuminating the faces around her. Tonight, we remember not just those we lost but the love and the legacies they left behind. They are not forgotten. They live on in us. As she spoke, a chill swept through the chapel, and for a moment, the light dimmed. Then, a soft breeze rustled the pages of the ledger, drawing everyone's attention. Emily felt it, an energy, a presence. The spirits were there, listening, and perhaps they were grateful. Margaret stood up, her voice steady but emotional. We should read the names. They deserve to be acknowledged. One by one, they began to read aloud the names from the ledger, and with each name spoken, the air grew warmer, the heaviness lifting. When they reached Thomas Reed, Emily paused, feeling the weight of the moment. I found this name today, she said, holding the ledger tightly. He was last seen in the mine, but his story doesn't end here. As if on cue, the wind howled outside, but it felt different, more like a song than a warning. The families shared a collective breath, sensing something stirring within the walls of the chapel. In that moment, Emily felt a presence beside her, and she knew Eli and the other miners were there, celebrating with them. She closed her eyes, channeling all her energy into that connection. If you can hear us, know that we honor you. You are loved, and your stories will live on. Suddenly, the candles flickered violently, casting elongated shadows that danced across the walls. The chapel filled with a warm light, and for a brief instant, the outline of figures appeared among the gathered families. Ghostly silhouettes, watching, smiling, finally at peace. As the light faded, a profound stillness enveloped the room. Families looked around in awe, tears flowing freely, but this time they were tears of joy. Emily felt a sense of completion wash over her. They had done what was needed. They had connected the past with the present, allowing the spirits to rest. After the service, the townsfolk began to come together, planning to restore Eldridge Hollow as a historical site, a place where stories would be told, where the miners would never be forgotten. Emily, Sarah, and Jake volunteered to help coordinate the efforts, feeling an intrinsic responsibility to ensure the history of the town was preserved. Weeks turned into months, and the once abandoned town began to transform. Visitors came to learn about the miners, the disaster, and the bravery of those who had lived and died in Eldridge Hollow. The memorial became a focal point, a place where families could gather, reminisce, and find solace. As the seasons changed, Emily often found herself visiting the chapel, sitting in quiet reflection. One crisp autumn evening, as she lit a candle in honor of the miners, she felt a familiar warmth surround her. In that moment, she knew the spirits were at peace, their stories finally being told. She glanced at the ledger, now framed on the wall, and smiled, feeling a sense of purpose. Eldridge Hollow had become more than a ghost town. It was a place of healing, remembrance, and community. The shadows had transformed into a legacy, and in honoring the past, they had forged a brighter future. As she stepped outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the cool air against her skin. She was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that the spirits would always be with her, guiding her forward, just as they had in the shadows of redemption. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.